The fascist ideology stems from the aftermath of the First World War. As the ashes began to settle, political dissidents began to grow in the population of the Old World. In many cases, such as in France or Britain, that dissidents formed against another war. The population became averse to conflict after bearing witness to the tremendous economic and human costs to such a deadly conflict. However, in two specific cases, war was not only desirable, but necessary for the growth of their people. Fascism stems from the mind of Benito Mussolini. Prior to the outbreak of the First World War, Mussolini had been an editor for a socialist newspaper in Italy. As tensions rose in the European continent, Mussolini and the socialists spoke out against the possibility of another war, even stating their pure denial to serve their government in that case. In the summer of 1914, the continent would be embroiled in that war, but something peculiar and contradictory took place. Many fascists in Italy broke their oaths. Rather than dodging the conflict, fleeing, or choosing to become martyrs for their cause, those socialists enlisted in the armed forces, and it's here that Mussolini's stance begins to change. He began to note that the love of country has overridden the socialists' initial stance against the war. When Italy needed their sons most, they answered the call. He noted that the love of nation overrides personal opposition. Sometime later, just after entering the war, or while he enlists, Mussolini rejects the idea of socialism. The core principle is that people are divided into two separate economic classes. He began to believe that that was incorrect. It proved faulty when placed into the real world, and he had seen that the love of country is greater than any sort of economic division. And what follows is the birth of the fascist ideology. Mussolini wrote down the fascist core beliefs after he returned from the war. Mussolini proclaimed that the goal of fascism was to create a strong central state run by a single individual. All education, culture, and warfare must be run by a single leader in order to give the country a single direction. The government is the moral, spiritual, and political guide to its people. When all people are united in working for the government, then the ideology is working as it should be. In order for the government to truly reach its purpose, fascism must reject the two major ideologies at the time, which are liberalism and socialism. Liberalism focuses on one's individual rights and offering all an equal chance to succeed and to search one's own destiny. Socialism, on the other hand, focuses on the two classes of individuals, capitalists and workers. They believe that they are in a constant battle with one another, and both ideologies are ripe for conflict. They promote division as the individuals inside both ideologies must be in some sort of competition with another. In order for the government to truly become the powerful force fascism needs it to be, it must therefore reject the idea of an individual person. Freedom doesn't come through individual rights or through overcoming class conflict. Instead, freedom comes from serving the state. The government creates freedom as it provides a purpose to the people under its care. All individuals overcome their own wants and needs in order to join a unitary society with the single goal of serving the state. Because fascism focuses on the needs of the government and the unitary society, it is impossible to define it as reactionary or conservative. Instead, it is a third way of government outside conservatism and liberalism. Fascism must reject religion, as it only removes loyalty to the state, and instead focuses on an individual salvation that cannot come from the dictator. Spiritual guidance comes from serving the country and following the dictator's rule rather than any sort of natural law created by a god, and therefore it must reject conservatism. In order to come the idea of individualism, Mussolini believed that the state must take control of a parent and teach individuals to abandon previous ideas. The state would control schools in order to indoctrinate children into believing that their needs as individuals are subservient to those of the state. Adults, on the other hand, had to be persuaded by state-controlled programming and propaganda. In 1925, Mussolini took control of the Italian government, becoming its head of state. And while he tried to implement his ideas from Rome, a second fascist dictator rose to power in the north. Adolf Hitler's brand of fascism is built on the roots of Mussolini's ideas, a strong centralized government run by a single dictator. The citizens are taught, controlled, and led by that same government, and the nation is the focus of all efforts of its citizenry. However, it is upon this bedrock that Adolf Hitler's National Socialist Workers' Party differs. Nazism incorporates a strong racial component to this ideology. Like Mussolini in Italy, Hitler believed Germany had a destiny. Hitler's dream of glory came through the establishment of something called a 1,000-year empire, or a Reich, with a fascist dictator at its head. In order to reach this goal, Hitler believed that the population must be unified not only in mind, but in body. This unification came to be called the Volk, or family. This race of superior people, which Hitler named the Aryan race, changed from time to time. However, there was a group of population called undesirables who were seen as less than human. Jews, Gypsies, Slavs, homosexuals, and others were considered to be part of this class. To Hitler and the Nazis, their brand of fascism focused so heavily on race that they believed there was no such thing as mankind. Instead, people were of a different race, and it was the equivalent of being a different species. Jews and Germans, according to Hitler, were akin to cats and dogs, and they were not the same thing. This could be seen through their attempts to unify the German Volk through racially motivated laws that excluded the undesirable population. During and after the Second World War and the deaths of Mussolini and Hitler, fascism continued to expand in limited ways. Spain, after going through their own civil war, adopted the government under Francisco Franco, though it moderated later on. Many of the occupied countries such as France, Greece, and Norway would set up puppet fascist governments, and there are other examples, but those are the most notable. Hopefully this video informs you on what the ideology is and what it truly means to be a fascist.